now tuning in to Discover Your Potential with radio talk show host Dan Gilman, Cindy Gilman's son. So listen, participate, be inspired, know that you can discover your potential. Here he is, Dan Gilman.
Hi, welcome to Discover Your Potential. I'm your host, Dan Gilman. I just want to introduce our very special guest. His name is Mike Brennan to our program, and he's known for his pop culture art, yoga art, live event sketching, and design, graphic design. He's also an author and illustrator of 5 self-published books. This is his latest book, Daily Creative Habit, a guided creative journal. So he's helped fellow creatives also and content creators leverage simple, practical steps for establishing a daily creative habit. And I wanted to welcome him to the show. Hi, Mike. So glad for you to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, it's quite an honor. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, first I wanted to start with your background and how you got started in design and illustration.
Sure. Yeah, I think like most artists, when you're a kid, that's the place where it all begins. It's drawing just things for fun and whatever happens to be a part of your world. And so for me, that was a lot of cartoons, right? Looney Tunes and Woody Woodpecker and all the Saturday morning cartoons, may they rest in peace. But all those cartoons were part of my world. And those were like my friends, those were like, that's the world that I was involved in. And then as I continued on, it was comic strips too, like, Hagar the Horrible and Calvin and Hobbes and Garfield and all those. And so I was drawing those things because I love those things. And so the very first memories that I have as far as art making was creating greeting cards for family members where I was drawing some of these cartoon characters. And then I would give this card to the family member and I would see their face light up. And I was like, I love the feeling of that. Now, obviously, as a kid, you're not thinking in terms of like, well, this is something I need to pay attention to. And you're just like, I'm showing up and having fun and I need to do more of this. Right.
Yes.
And so those seeds were planted really early for me. The thought that as I look back, I realized I could create something and have an impact on somebody else's life, whether it's I give it to them and they smile, or I help solve a problem, or I just create something that's beautiful or funny or whatever it is. There's a connection that's formed through what it is that I create. So I was like, I need to lean into this. And I got involved more and more in school with just doing more art classes and projects and things. And eventually it was the conversation that I think all parents dread with their kid, where the kid says, I want to go to art school. Right. And the response is, are you sure you don't want to be a doctor, a lawyer, something that makes money, and I totally get that. I understand there's the, starving artist mentality that runs very rampant in our society.
Sure.
And it's natural because, parents want their kids to do well and succeed. And I was just very stubborn. And I said, well, if I'm not going to art school, I'm not going to school. I'll show you. Right. I'll shipwreck my life just to spite you. Right. So I ended up going to art school. I went to Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City for an advertising and design degree. And then also went on to a bachelor's degree in School of Visual Arts. So through that, got my training that was more in graphic design, because that was kind of the compromise I had with my parents, where it was like, well, do something art related, but that's still commercially viable where you can make some money.
Yep.
And so I thought, well, I love entertainment. I love pop culture. If I can do something with design and marrying those things together, that would be great. And so from there, just went off into the world and worked in a variety of different contexts, from advertising agencies that were really large with, like Heineken and Mobil as their clients, where I felt like a little bit of, the cog in the giant wheel, the corporate wheel, quickly found out that's not the environment for me. And then went to other places where like I was the art department and had to get real scrappy and did some editorial layout design for magazines and kind of a whole smattering of different types of projects in between. But that's pretty much how, that part of my interest in career shaped up for that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you have a very diverse portfolio.
Yes.
As you know, it includes pop culture art, yoga art. I'm going to ask about that soon.
Yes.
And it's sketching, of course, and design. But can you tell us about your creative process and how you approach different projects?
Yes. So I think really, when it comes time for me to create something, and even if this is now client-based, because it used to be, okay, get the creative brief, somebody else is kind of pulling the strings, if you will, and I'm just following some directives that are external, and then trying to bring my own sensibilities to those things. There are
Mm.
still those moments where I may have to do that, but by and large, I figured out that I work best when I can follow my curiosity. And so if it's something that's a subject matter that I'm interested in, or there's somehow a relationship involved, that I want to explore more, that's usually the jumping point for me. And then I dive into it and say, okay, well, what can we do here? And there's a fair amount of play and experimentation that's involved in my process now. It wasn't always like that,
Mhm.
honestly. And I think you kind of need to come to a place where you get to know yourself enough. You become a student of yourself, of how you need to work, what kind of parameters, and you also learn to listen to intuition a lot more and gain
Yeah.
confidence through trying more things and putting more work out there. And so these days, it's really a lot about that curiosity that drives me, and then playing, experimenting, breaking some things, figuring out, okay, well, I thought this was the end result. This was going to be the end product, but actually, this turned out to be a failure, quote,
Mm.
but it's a bridge to something else.
Mm.
And maybe I can take something that I found out and discovered in that process and apply it to a new project. And so, in that way, I don't consider those things failures.
That sounds great. You're also an author, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, author and illustrator of, is it five? Five, right? Five
Yeah, I'm
published
losing
books?
count now.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I got it right. It's not six. Can you tell us more about the inspiration behind your books and the process of even self-publishing?
Yes. So I
And
didn't.
actually, why did you choose self-publishing over?
Yeah. So much like I said, we're starting with curiosity. That's really where these books were born out of. And the first one, I say it was my accidental book, because I didn't set out to write a book or illustrate a book. My first one is called Dear Snow: One Man's Angry Rant Against Winter.
Mm,
And it's what I call my autobiography, because I hate snow and I hate winter. And where this came from was that actually I used to get on Twitter and rant about how much I hated snow.
oh,
And so I had all these tweets. Every time it would snow, I'd be out there shoveling and I'm like, man, I can't stand this. And I'd be like, Dear Snow, get off my lawn, and like all these different, like, sarcastic, really snarky things. And a bunch of people started to expect that from me, right? Friends
oh,
and everybody, like, oh, it's snowing. What's Mike going to say? And so it kind of became this long running joke for me over several years. And then finally, somebody said to me once, they're like, you should make a book out of all those. And I'm like,
mm,
that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Who's going to buy a book of angry tweets? Right. So, but then I sat with the idea a little bit more, and I was like, well, what else could I do with that? Like, what could that look like? And I was like, well, an artist, duh. So what if I draw and I illustrate characters? And I'm like, of course I'm the hero, and there's my enemy Snow, who's this evil snowman, and all the kind of capers that evolve over several months of winter. And
mm,
so I took the tweets and I kind of curated those and figured out which ones that I could illustrate. And then I took inspiration from Calvin and Hobbes, and like Trains, Planes, Automobiles, and
oh
Grumpy Old
yeah,
Men, like all these different
great movies.
inspiration points where it was
Sure.
basically somebody complaining, ranting, some form of comedic sarcasm. And I just dumped it all into this book. And then in in a 30-day stretch, I basically curated that stuff. I illustrated, I figured out Amazon KDP, the self-publishing platform, and did some marketing for it. It was like the crash course, just get in there and learn it and figure it
Right.
out.
Wow.
And so it definitely was like a crazy time to do that, but it taught me a bunch of things. And one was, with self-publishing, I was like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm like everything else, I throw myself into it and figure it out.
Mhm.
And it allowed me to make certain decisions and retain, my own intellectual property. So I'm not selling it or having to worry about, transferring those rights and all. And
Sure.
it gave me the ability to get in there and really start to learn more about promoting and about marketing a product and my book. And so
Wow.
all these points were opportunities for me to learn and to grow. And so with each book that came after that, it was always like, okay, well, I did the first one. I proved to myself I could do this.
Yeah.
Now there's a little bit of rinse and repeat in the process, but I'm applying some different things. And I would always try to figure out how can I throw something else in the mix that would up the ante a little bit more, so that I'm continuing to learn, to grow, to not just do the same old, same old.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of been my pattern in that. And to go, I know that I can do this. I've proved to myself. And how can I then continue to show up and provide resources and content for people that they would really enjoy and benefit from?
Oh, that's great. Well, speaking of which, to segue, but you help fellow creatives establish a daily, as you mentioned, daily creative habit
Yes.
through your I should say international speaking, right? Public speaking, and your own like daily creative habit community that you've created, a newsletter, and your course, your artist journey. Can you share some tips on how to establish and maintain a daily creative habit? And
Yes.
that can certainly segue into your book as well.
Sure. Yeah. So the starting point for this, just so that people know, like, this wasn't just something that I had and this idea to put out more content.
Yeah.
This has come from my own journey, my own experiences. And I walked away from my art for about 10 years and had no even, personal connection with my art. It was simply me exploring just a different path at that point in my life. And ultimately, it led me to a place of depression. It
Mm.
led me to a place of just rock bottom, where a lot of life events converged. Losing my dad to cancer,
I'm
having
sorry
to
to hear that.
leave the thank you, having to leave the field that I was in at that point for work, having to move. Like, it was just several things, one after the other, where those moments in life where you're like, how did we get here? Like, how did life become this?
Mhm.
And it was in the middle of that I kind of felt this voice inside me saying, you need to come back to your art, because it one time brought you joy. It brought you happiness.
Mhm.
And to be honest, I wasn't even sure if that was possible, right? After
Mhm.
being away for so long, it was trying to exercise muscles that I hadn't used in a really long time. And
Sure.
so the starting point for me was, I need to do this almost as a form of therapy and a form of just getting in touch with that place within me again, because I need joy. And so the bar was set really low. And I set out to do this, and I was like, I'm going to do a 365-day art making journey, which was crazy for me at the time, because I'm like, I haven't done anything consistently for the past 10 years. So how can
Mm.
I do a whole year? And so through that process, I leaned in. I ended up getting to the end of a year, and then I kept going, because I was like, I don't think I'm done yet. And then I kept going, kept going. Well, I'm still going, and it'll
That's
be
great.
11 years this coming April, time of this recording, where every single day I've shown up and done something. In the beginning, it was 5-10 minutes and a pen and ink drawing, and it was some pretty lame artwork. Honestly, it was embarrassing.
Mm.
But I was invested in the journey. I was invested in the process and the momentum that it was creating.
Yeah.
And so that's why I talk about a daily creative habit, because so often we think about creating in these big blocks of time, creating a masterpiece, right? We set the bar really high. It's got to be perfect. And then when those things don't happen, we're disappointed,
Yeah.
and we either don't show up anymore, or we keep looking for something that's elusive and we get frustrated.
Yeah.
And all the while, there's pockets of time, even if it's 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour a day, where we can start showing up and making these deposits.
Yeah.
And so as I learned this through my own journey, I started to figure out, oh, this isn't just for me, but this is really for any creative person,
Mm.
regardless if it's visual art, if it's music, if it's whatever the creative expression is. It almost doesn't matter. It's the process of showing up consistently
Yeah.
and making those deposits in your creativity. And so that's where the journal came from. The Daily Creative Habit journal came from. That's where the
Mm.
community, there's a free Facebook group, Daily Creative Habit, as
Wow.
well as the email newsletter that you mentioned. And all resources are at dailycreativehabit.com if somebody's interested. But all these things that I'm creating are for other people, to help them show up consistently so that they can create. Because I know,
Mhm.
like, I wouldn't have come up with books. I wouldn't have come up with a lot of the projects that I've had as far as art series or had opportunities like I have if I hadn't shown up, because
Yeah.
that's like step one is show up and start to do something.
Yeah.
And then you start to figure it out as you play, as you experiment, as you question, as you follow curiosity.
Yeah.
You figure out what you're passionate about. And so you asked about some introductory steps, even in this process. And the first one I would say is, start small, because that's what I had to do, right? It was, I don't have enough energy or even mental health at this point to invest an hour or a weekend or something. And I don't really know what I would do if I had that amount of time,
Right.
because I'd been so out of touch with it. So I would say, we lower the bar, we start small with the most right next step. And for somebody that may be going, I'm not going to think about making a huge painting, or I'm not going to think about a huge production of whatever it is that I want to accomplish, but I'm going to think, what can I do in maybe 10 minutes? Because those 10 minutes will get me thinking, will get me going and start flexing those creative muscles again.
Yeah.
You start to string those together enough, then you start to get some momentum and you start to see some work developing, right? We understand this in terms of like going to the gym. If you go often enough, right? Well, many of us are guilty for not doing that, myself
Yes.
included. But, at
Me
least
too.
conceptually, right? Conceptually, you go to the gym and you work out and
Yeah.
you see results over time. You see muscle building, you see weight loss, right?
Right.
And it's those time increments that happen spread out over the weeks, right? Same thing. Or financially, you
That's
make
brilliant.
deposits, you save.
Sure.
Well, creatively, it's the same exact thing. We need to start rethinking how we approach creativity,
Sure.
not in these grand gestures, but in the small moments
Yeah.
that strung together lead to big moments. So,
Yeah. A lot of people
starting
don't
small.
get to flex their muscle with creativity. I know for me, I haven't really picked up a pencil, sadly, or canvas in
Yeah.
ages.
Yeah.
Since college, as sadly as that is. Well, that's not
Yeah.
true. It's a little bit beyond that, but I would love to. So
Yeah. And it's more accessible than we think it is. That's
yeah.
the thing. And it's
Well, and not
employing.
only that, but I mean, just for me anyway. I didn't mean to interject. Sorry,
Mhm.
but for me anyway, because I'm an artist, it's part of my soul. It's my being.
Yes.
So you can't just let that
Yeah.
dissolve.
There's a part of you that if you don't show up like that, you feel like there's a part of you that's dying.
Correct.
Or that's gone
Or it's
dormant.
dead.
And
Right.
yeah, and you can't show up in other areas of your life properly because you feel off.
Yes.
And sometimes people can't verbalize that. They just know, I don't feel right, but I'm not really exactly sure why. And sometimes through conversation, we realize, oh, the reason is because I'm not taking the time for myself to just create.
Right.
And, sometimes that's creating for other people, but sometimes that's creating for yourself.
Yeah.
I know plenty of people who don't intend to harness their creativity for their career or their jobs. They simply want something that, we would term it a hobby or passion project, personal interest, something that engages them where they can show up and there's nobody telling them what to do. There's no committees. There's no other clients. There's no creative. They're just going, I want to have fun. I want to explore. I want to make because I enjoy the process. I want to be curious. I want to play because I don't have other areas in my life where I can play. It's all responsibility. It's all, being driven by other people and other things and demands,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I empathize.
Yeah.
Can you talk I also wanted to ask you, can you also talk about like some of the most challenging challenging projects you've worked on and how you overcome any obstacles during that process?
Ooh.
I didn't tell you these questions are going to get
No,
harder and harder as
it's
they
all
go.
good. This is where I have to exercise my creativity also. I can't think of like one specific instance where it was like, this was a project that was really difficult for me to navigate. But I think uh, on the regular, I have to figure out how to problem solve some things. And so whether that's client based, and I'm trying to get to the root of what is the real need here and what's the solution that I can bring with my set of skills. so that at the end of the day, the client is happy and feeling like I've heard them and I've understood the issue and the problems and delivered something that not just meets their need, but then goes beyond and meets the need of their client or whatever their industry is or how they show up visually. If it's something more of a personal passion project, there are times when, like I said, I will intentionally throw a few things in the mix that challenge me because I don't want things to get stale and I want to continue to grow as a creative person.
Yeah.
And so, and I know enough of myself where I learn best by having a ready application for something. So I'm not somebody who's going to read something in a book or a manual and go, oh, that's great information, and one day I'll use that.
Right.
That doesn't work for me. It goes in one ear, out the other. I
Yep.
need right now, I need to solve this problem. How do we do this? You know, we're building the plane as we fly a little bit. There's a little
Right.
bit of chaos and anxiety and panic, but that's also part of it.
Yep.
Right. So so I think it's just maintaining a sense of being true to what it is that you're trying to create while also problem solving with what's before you. And sometimes that means learning
Yeah.
a new skill. Sometimes that means calling somebody else in that has that skill or a piece of advice or a sounding board.
Mhm.
It's being a little more open with the process. And so it's not ego driven where it's all has to be me and all that I can see and do.
Right.
Because we know most projects that are great and that make some kind of impact in our lives, there's been several people who've been involved in it. And so
Sure.
why should we think we're any different? Right.
Right. And on that topic, I'm going to be a little bit of selfish too on this
Sure.
question, and I think other designers or artists actually probably want to hear about this as well. But can you tell us a little bit about your experience working with clients? Because you brought up clients, both
Yes.
major brands or even independent agencies, and how you navigate the client designer relationship. That's really important, the client designer relationship.
Yes. Yes. And, you know, it's tricky sometimes, right? Because every client can be different. Some clients come and they have a sense of what it is that they're looking for. They have a vision. They've done their homework to figure out, okay, here's the project where we want to go with this. And maybe here's some samples of what some other people have done that have really spoken to us in some way, which that makes it really easy. Most of the time, it's learning to facilitate conversation and also educating clients and saying, look, they're hiring me because of my expertise and my skill set.
Yeah.
And so I need to be able to engage with them in such a way that I'm helping them understand project parameters. I'm helping them understand maybe some areas in which they haven't thought through some things that they need to do a little more homework. And I'm also bringing context a lot of times where it's maybe some strategy piece or some bigger picture. So it's not just simply for me, I'm the designer who you've handed something off and here's the creative brief and now just go and be the production person.
Right.
It's saying I'm utilizing my mind and I'm also thinking like, okay, when I create this, here's the various applications in which you're going to encounter in the future. I'm already thinking about that for you. And so I think all of that stuff, it's all rooted in serving. It's all rooted in how can I serve my client best in what I do? And so that ultimately you want them to come to a place where they trust you because they've hired you to be the expert. And so for you to be able to show up and own that and deliver what you say that you would deliver, right? Because you as a creative person, you need to learn your time management. You need to learn to be dependable and not be the quote flaky artist, because that's what a lot of clients fear. I've been burned in the past. I hired some guy off, whatever, and they took my money and they gave me something and I couldn't use it. And now I'm coming to you because they screwed it up and I need somebody else to fix it. Right.
Right.
So it's listening.
I've heard that many times.
Yes. It's listening. It's serving. It's being a person in the midst of that, not just simply going, this is an ends to a means. This is a paycheck. This is a project that's just whatever, but really going, even if this is something outside the normal industry that you work in or a project that you would take, always look for opportunity to serve and learn. And I think you'll set yourself apart from a lot of other people who are simply looking to just get as many clients as they can and crank through things and impose their view of things. And I was having this conversation with a client earlier today. They were like, we so appreciate your approach in being like diplomatic in the design process, because we've worked with some other designers in the past where they were like, this is the way it is. I'm the expert here. Listen to me. And their feathers got ruffled if somebody pushed back on them and asked questions. And I'm like, I think that's silly. I think we need to be open and dialogue about things, because everyone is a part of the process. And if everyone's going to win at the end of the day and feel good about it, we all need to bring things to the table.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to harken back to more. I don't mean to keep jumping around, but you studied in New York City.
Yes.
And you graduated from the Fashion Institute of Technology, which is really amazing, and the School of Visual Arts, which is another amazing institution there in New York. Can you share some ways in which your education also influenced your work?
Sure. I get that question a lot as far as like...
Oh, do you?
Well, as far as like, should people go to art school? Really, that's really how they term that. And I say, well, it really kind of depends, right? Because if you're looking for learning skills, learning methods and techniques, there's so much of that available on the internet and elsewhere. You can find that stuff, and you don't have to go into a lot of debt to be able to learn those things. The advantage, in my opinion, and especially in going to schools like that, I had proximity to people, working professionals,
correct,
who not only had connections in the field, but you knew that they were working on things that you were seeing on a regular basis. And so the information they were giving you and the advice they were giving you wasn't from like 20 years ago or theoretical. It was real time. And so that also helped raise the bar in terms of the quality of work, because they expected a certain caliber out of you. And at first it can be a little jarring, because you're like, oh, wow, like there's a lot of talented people here. And as years went on, people peeled off. And the people who we ended up graduating with were a smaller group of people than who we started with. And that kind of winnowing effect, it happens because there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of other demands that happen. And sometimes interest, people think they're interested in pursuing something for a career, and then they're like, nah, I'd rather just keep this for myself, which is fine. But that whole process of going through that and those relationships were key for me in setting a standard, and also a pace, right? In being in New York City, things happen fast. And so you need to learn to adapt to that type of environment and those kind of demands. And that's a much better place to be, especially earlier on, than it is to be someplace where you can't work under those conditions and suddenly find yourself in those conditions.
Right. I know when I went and I attended Mass College of Art, that's where I went to school. I absolutely enjoyed going to the Museum of Fine Arts every single day almost.
Yeah.
You can't do that with online learning. And plus reaching out to, they had professors from RISD there, and because they're a state school, but they had really amazing faculty at Mass Art. I learned so much just because I did illustration and then graphic design.
Yeah.
So, but like you, I feel the same way. It's like, it's a totally different experience.
Totally.
And I would never change it. I mean, I wish I could go back actually, but my professors always said that to me. They always said, someday you're going to say you want to come back here. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
No. But, but of course I was like, 3:00 in the morning and in the dorms in the studio painting with other people who are just as passionate as me and love doing the same work and feeling that kind of creativity and that energy and synergy, and taking my friends and going to the Museum of Fine Arts and really looking at, I mean, it's a totally different experience than now, because I don't have that access anymore.
Right. And one of the things too is like looking at that and going, okay, what is it that was so attractive about that? It wasn't necessarily that it was that time period or, that specific place, but really when you boil it down, it was the community, right? It was being among fellow creative people who were pushing you to be the best you could be.
Yes.
And it was consistency, because you had a lot of projects that you had to do, and it was pretty much consuming your time, your thoughts, everything. And so some of that is like, okay, well, how can we recapture that? Like now we're in the
Yes.
midst of some things and we have some other responsibilities and maybe family and whatever else. But how can we still recapture some of those elements and put them in place so that we're not thinking only like nostalgia, but we're thinking today, show up for my art, show up for my creativity, and implement
Yeah.
some of those things that actually were key moments and key elements of the past, but they may need to look different today.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to, I don't mean to keep jumping around, but there
Yeah.
was another question that I want to ask you about. And a lot of people may not know what live event sketching is
Mhm.
that are watching this program, but can you talk about your experience working with live event sketching and how you capture that energy? We're talking about capturing the energy. How
Yes.
we capture that energy and atmosphere of an event in your
Mhm.
illustrations.
Yes. So this was another thing that happened by accident. There's a theme in my life. Oh, I didn't know that this is something that I should be paying attention to. Sometimes I'm a little dense, but
Hmm.
I was at an event that, quite honestly, it was a crossroads for me. I had just been let go from a position, and it was kind of sudden, and I was kind of reeling from that a little bit. And I was thinking to myself, I really need to get to this event. And it was mostly for authors and writers. And
Mm.
I don't know why I felt this compulsion to go, but I just felt like I need to be there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not a writer at that point. I'm not like, I'm a visual guy. Why would I, but again, it was just something like, you need to be there. You need to be there. You need to be there. And so
Mm.
I kind of bargained with God and I said, all right, well, if I'm going to be there, then you need to show up and make some ways, part the sea or whatever, because, the amount of money and the, all the things that I needed to pull this off. So anyway, I ended up going and a lot of people rallied around me and they were like, yeah, we want you to thrive at this. And so I went to this event and I'm still there and I'm kind of like, okay, great. I'm here. I'm with writers and authors and they're talking somewhat about marketing and somewhat about promoting things and creating. And I'm like, there's certainly themes that are applicable and not just about my specific creative expression, which is good. But as I'm there, I'm feeling a little bit introverted because I'm like, I don't really
Mm.
know anybody here. And I'm half introvert, half extrovert. At this moment, I'm in a room of people. I don't know anybody. So I'm feeling
Yeah.
pretty introverted. And
Mm.
so what do? I'm leaning on my creative abilities and I had my iPad and I just start sketching because I'm like, it's something to do and not feel awkward. Right. So the thing that happened right away, I realized was people started to notice and they'd start to come over and ask questions. And I was
Oh.
like, this is interesting. It's now opening up some conversations
Mm.
and okay, that's cool. And then there was a guy who was there who was saying, hey, I want to offer 15 minutes of free time to talk about any business ideas or anything you want. Just
Mm.
come and check in. And so I was like, I'm going to take advantage of this guy because I'm at this crossroads and I need to figure some stuff out. And so I spent this time with him and he knew what I was doing during this event because I was sharing it out on social media and he said, this is a service. This is a business. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is just something I quote, just do, right?
Mm.
A lot of times the things that we're so close to that we just do that seem no big deal to us
Yeah.
actually are a big deal to a lot of other people who don't have those abilities, or we're just too close to our own abilities sometimes.
Right.
And so it took this guy leaning in and saying, yes, this is a service and this is actually marketing and this is storytelling.
Wow.
This isn't just you simply just doing a drawing at a live event.
Sure.
And he said, but think about what can that look like as a more of a service? What
Mm.
kind of packages would you offer? Give people some examples of some things. And so I walked out of that meeting with my head reeling and going like, wow, this is a lot to think about. But I leaned into that and I loved really fleshing it out to say I'm when I'm at an event, I'm there as a attendee. And so I'm sitting amongst everybody else and I'm seeing what they're seeing. And so I'm drawing from their perspective of the
Wow.
attendee. And so it's somebody who's on stage and there's maybe a quote that somebody said that's everybody in the room gasps and is like, oh, that's the one. Right. And so I'm writing that down and I'm capturing the person in real time. And I'm doing this all digitally on my iPad. And I learned some hacks and tricks to make sure that I'm doing this because sometimes people are speaking for maybe 20, 25 minutes. And by the time they're done, I have the sketch done. And sometimes depending upon if the organization has hired me to do the social media end of it too, I've posted it on social media and tagged a bunch of things and tagged the people who are in it.
Right.
So it became this almost like built-in viral type thing too, where
Mm.
the more I made it about other people, right? Whether it was the speakers, whether it's attendees, whether it's the organization itself that hired me, who was putting the event on,
Sure.
the more they got excited about something that I did. And it was the way that I saw things also. It wasn't just simply my skill to be able to illustrate something or sketch something in a 20-minute, window.
Yeah.
But it was how I processed, how I saw, how I showed up at that event. And so I said, I'm going to continue to lean into this and offer this to any event or gathering or conference. They want to hire me to come in and basically storytell from, beginning to end, a series of sketches that all tell the story. Here's what's happening at the event. And here's some of the highlights and special events and the branding and all that stuff incorporated into things.
Wow, that's wonderful. You also mentioned online presence, so that's going to kind of segue into my next question. But
Sure.
you have a really strong online presence, I would say, including your website, your social media. And I think there's a lot of artists too that might be watching this. But can you share some tips on like how to build and maintain a strong online presence for specifically creative professionals?
Yes.
I think that's pretty important too as a creative professional.
Yes, for sure. For sure. And most of the people who I think struggle with that are the people who would categorize themselves as introverts, because they're like, look, I don't want to do that stuff. I hate that stuff. Social media, if it fell off the planet, I would not cry. They're like, I want to go in my cave and do my creative work, and then, don't bother me. Right.
Yep.
But the problem is we need those things because that's how people can see what it is that we're doing. Those are there to form connections. Right. And they have to lead back to someplace, right? It can't just be a dead end unto itself. Like, I'm posting today because I feel like I should be. That's what everybody's telling me to do. Right. There needs to be some strategy in place. And I would always say, trace everything you do back to your own website, because that's a place that you own. Yep. The other places, like we've heard of people losing their access to their Instagram accounts, or a whole social media just going away, or So to build something on somebody else's land or platform is dangerous. Yet we still need to be engaged in those places. So I would say, what I offer, even in Daily Creative Habit, the first principle of start small. If you're not doing anything, start small. Figure out what seems doable for you, and be varied, right? Like, show a work in progress, because people love to see your process. Show final pieces, and don't just show the work, but like, talk about why you're doing it. Share stories, because people love stories. They're not just going to want to see, like, I have, some work behind me or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, that's Jeff Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum seems like a cool guy. That's why I did that. And people are like, okay, nice. And maybe I like the aesthetics of the visual art. But, if I said, hey, growing up, I was watching a lot of movies, and Jeff Goldblum was one of those actors where he was just everywhere. And like Jurassic Park, man, when that came out, and just seeing him as part of that cast, like, just give more context and more story of why it's important. He's a very colorful guy. Everything he shows up in, he has personality, and it's amazing just to see how he deals with his own creativity and the different places it shows up. So that was something where I'm like, I want to honor that in the piece that I do, and it's over here. Right. So I want to honor that and honor him, and saying, hey, as a fellow creative, thank you for showing up and doing your work. And so that is much more meaningful than me just posting the picture of that work and going, yeah, Jeff Goldblum, there you go. By the way, I hope I meet him one day and get to give him some of my art, because I think it'd be cool.
Fantastic.
So Jeff, if you're listening, or somebody who knows Jeff, hook a brother up.
That'd be great. When did you actually discover your potential? And can you talk about the challenges or obstacles that you faced, not only as a designer and illustrator, but as a person, and how did you overcome them? And when did you really find, kind of like your purpose?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. And I love that question. And it so resonates to the core of me, because I've always tried to be someone who has been motivated by wanting to contribute something more significant and greater than myself. And even in all the things that I've been through in life, that have been those moments that are the dark hours and the trials, looking for some redemptive thread in it and going, okay, I wouldn't have chosen to go through that, but I had to go through that. how can it make me better? Or what does this make possible?
Yeah.
What can I learn for myself? And not only for myself, but for somebody else. How can it make me more empathetic for somebody else who I can come into contact with, who may be struggling with certain things? And that's why I talk a lot about mental health and creativity, honestly. Do I enjoy sharing that? There were times in my life where I really struggled with that. And I struggled to get out of bed and didn't have that sense of purpose or drive. No, not at all. But that's part of my story. And that also led someplace for me. It led me back to my art. And so, finding purpose and finding the significance in my work and in myself has been this journey that, honestly, even having gone into full-time ministry, which is what I did in that 10-year gap when I left design world and I left, anything that had to do with art, I basically said, like, this doesn't feel fulfilling enough in the way that I don't feel like I'm really truly helping people. And so that ended up leading me into full-time ministry, where I felt like, okay, great. Now I'm helping people. And I can see the fruit of my work, but there's not much happening creatively. And so I'm not showing up who I was created to be.
Mm.
And so I was denying a part of myself. And that's what really ushered in a lot of the depression and this sense of like, really purposelessness, which confused me more because it was so tied up to my personal beliefs and my work in ministry. And I was like, what greater calling can there be than ministry, working for God? Right. Like, and yet I have this struggle where I feel like I lost my purpose. I lost the plot. And so having to go through that dark night of the soul, though, really helped me come through the other side, because I engaged with that. I questioned and I wrestled. And it led me to the place of my art and showing up every day and doing these deposits of my creativity. And that gave me a place to figure some things out. It gave me a place of self-discovery along the way, and continues to. And that was worth the journey alone. It wasn't simply just, hey, I had this body of work I could show, or I had these opportunities, but really it was, I got to know myself better. I got to understand, oh, see, I struggled with the fact that I have multiple creative expressions that I enjoy, right? And multiple projects, as we've talked about. And I didn't realize that I dove deep into thinking about my creativity in terms of visual art and identifying that as my identity. That it took me a long time to unpack that and realize, well, there are other creative expressions that I really enjoy. And it's not simply that I'm an artist or a visual artist. Yes, I'm a creative person. And yes, that's what I need to do, but it's bigger than that one expression.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started to unpack things and realize, oh, you know what? It's really more about how I see and what I see and how I show up and talk about those things. And that, honestly, that revelation came to me maybe even like within the last year or so, where I was like, oh, like if something happened to me, God forbid, and I couldn't do anything visual art anymore, and I lost that ability, I can still show up as me and the creative person I am, because I'm sharing my story and experiences. I'm sharing how I see things. And nowadays that sometimes looks like written form, or sometimes it's my podcast, or sometimes it's speaking. And sometimes, yes, it is visual art. But these are all things that are tools in a toolbox with a greater vision and a greater mission and purpose of, yes, I'm creating things because I love to, and I want to serve people in those creations, but I'm also showing up to say, this is how I see things. And I want to help other people create, because that's really where I feel like I can have the biggest ripple effect. If I come alongside somebody else who wants to show up for their creativity, and they start to lean in and they start to create things and they start to put things out into the world, like when one person creates, we all win, because then they're fulfilling their purpose. They're creating the things that people are waiting for, that only they can create. And so that sense of helping people, that sense of creativity, all the pieces of my past all of a sudden started to align, where they weren't just disjointed pieces of my journey, but it was all training ground leading me to this place where I am today. And it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to figure that out, to stay the course, and to continually ask questions and not settle on an answer just for the sake of having an answer, right? Because that's so often what we want. Just give me an answer. Just give me a direction. I don't care. But to find that thing that's actually authentic and aligned with who we are, and how we're gifted, and so that we can show up. That's incredibly powerful and leading for us. And a lot of the other stuff ends up being, okay, these are problems we need to solve in the midst of that, but at least we have a sense of direction and purpose and mission.
Oh, that is incredible. I have one last question.
Sure.
Sorry. Well, I've got several questions, but I have one
Lay 'em
last
on me,
question.
whatever you got.
But just so people know, lastly, like, what is the next for you in terms of projects and goals, and what are you working towards?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I said, my creativity is kind of morphed and changed a little bit through the seasons, and I'm still continuing to, do projects where it's visual art, and whether that's design or illustration, client-based things and personal passion projects. I think you should always have passion projects, because that's the place where you can play and break things and you don't have other people telling you what to do. And that can inform your client work also, because we're not these segmented beings like we pretend we are. But beyond those type of things, continuing to do live sketching for events, I'm also really doubling down on being that person, the advocate for creators and for entrepreneurs and people who basically want to show up more consistently for their creativity and innovation, and specifically helping them with establishing a daily creative habit of their own. And so developing more resources like the journal that you spoke about earlier, and leading some workshops, both virtual and in person, more speaking engagements, so that I can get on more stages and impact more people, and really speak to the people who need to hear the message of, like, you know what, it's time that you choose yourself and your creativity. Because so often that's the biggest stumbling block. People have just said, who am I to show up and do this? Or I have tons of other responsibilities, or I don't have time for this, or I walked away from it and now I'm in a different season of life and I feel like I want to return to it, but I don't know if I can. Like all those objections, I want to come around those people and just be like, look, if this is possible for me, it's possible for you. There's nothing magical or special about me other than me showing up and doing the work and uncovering who I really am, and then leaning into that. And part of that is me doing more of these opportunities, more of these resources, creating them and putting them out there, and looking for more people to partner with and collaborate with, because my reach it will only go so far. And so the more people that I can go, you know what, let's link arms and let's really truly make a difference in people's lives, so that they feel creatively fulfilled, but then also other people get blessed through what it is that they do.
Yeah. Do they even have, I haven't seen many of them, creative conferences? I
There
see
are.
design
Yeah.
conferences, but I've not seen as many creative conferences.
Yeah, there certainly are. And there's, something, within the last year or so, creator economy has been something that has been a term that has been growing more and more. And that's really more almost like the intersection of entrepreneurs and creativity and creators in that regard. And I think those are important conversations to be a part of, and communities to be a part of too, because it's talking about, okay, we're creating something, but then also how do we bring it to the marketplace, and how do we develop business skills, and how do we think about our art in terms of it reaching people, not just simply being something that feels significant for us personally. And so there are some avenues like that. And I'd also love to partner with corporations, where if they have teams and they want to bring me in to talk to their team about how they can harness creativity or innovation. Because so often I was that person, right, who was on a team in a corporate environment, and it's always like about productivity. It's always about just the next project. Done. Exactly. And yet there's a level of care and a level of intention for creativity that sometimes gets passed. And so people are starting to realize, like, oh, with all the skill things that are being offset by AI and all these other things, like there's still this sense of having a critical mind and a creative mind and innovation that we can't replace with that stuff. And so we need to pour more gas on that, so people are showing up better and more creative and feel free to be able to express and explore those things even in the corporate world. So I would love to speak to more people on that plane and to say, I understand your world because I came out of it, but I also understand the context of like engaging in these things personally and how the two can blend.
Yeah, we should talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside of that. So how can people get in touch with you? What is the best way for people to reach you directly? And also, I'd love to promote this amazing journal that you've pulled together. And actually, if you're one of the lucky listeners, I'm going to give one. Well, no, maybe, you know what? I'm going to give 5 of
Nice.
these daily creative habit journals, not mine because this is my copy, but I'm going to get 5 copies for somebody else for the daily creative, because it is truly astounding. And you don't have to be an artist to use it either. You could
Right.
just, anybody who wants to be creative can actually use the journal. But of course, if you're an artist, it's a plus. But
Yes.
definitely want to check this out. So anybody that's interested, you can email. I'm going to use my mother's email address, Cindy, because it's easier to track. Cindy@cindygilman.com. That's Cindy@cindygilman.com. Thanks, Mom, for letting me use your email address. And you'll be lucky, one of the 5 lucky winners of his amazing journal.
Well, that's very generous of you, and I'm excited for those people who are the winners. And to answer your question, as far as people getting in touch with me, the best place is probably my main website, which is mikebrennan.me, M-E. That's kind of the hub where you can find things for Daily Creative Habit. You can find my event sketching, graphic design links, my own illustration work and books. All those things are there. I'm also very active on Instagram. I'm at Mike Bone, B-O-N-E. And so I'm posting there usually daily and engaging through DMs and such there. And I would just love to say also, like, in terms of the journal, people have asked, like, well, is this something that's like a creative prompt thing? Like, what does this look like? And it really came from me wanting to help people set intention around creating. And so this isn't a resource that's filled with specific prompts for every single day. Something like that is coming. But this is simply it's sectioned off so that there's a creative quote to kind of bring some inspiration. And then there's a section in the morning that says, hey, let's show up in the morning and do this. We can do this in 5 minutes. Set intention of, like, when are you going to create today? What is it that you're going to create? Asking yourself a series of questions again and again and again. After 90 days, you start to make this part of your rhythm. And then there's a section at night that says, okay, did you show up? Did you create what you said you were going to create? How are you going to celebrate? These
this is pretty
really these mile markers for our journey. And being able to actually be intentional about that is huge, because so often, again, we just kind of follow the muse, or we go on a whim.
Yeah.
And then we kind of go, maybe I did some stuff, maybe I didn't. I don't really know how to measure that. I don't really know if I'm growing. I don't know what to celebrate. Like, there's so much that's just slippery. So this is designed to give us intention to show up and to stay engaged in a process. And after 90 days, that hopefully this process takes root, and that you continue to lean into this, and then it sets you up for going, where am I identifying on my schedule that I'm showing up to create? What is it that I want to create? Why do I want to create those things? And as well as giving a place for notes and drawing and some of those other things. And so this came out of, again, my own journey. And I really hope that this process, and I believe it will, speak to any type of creative person, anybody who's creating anything. So course creating a podcast, creating a painting, creating music, doesn't really matter what the specific is. You can still apply this process.
Well, thank you, Mike. I truly appreciate you. You're being here. It's been a gift and an honor and a joy for you to be a part of Discover Your Potential.
Well, thank you, Dan. Seriously, I've enjoyed our conversation today, and I really hope that it speaks to many people.
Yeah, I know it will. This is Dan Gilman, and I want to thank everybody, all my listeners here today, and thank Mike for being here. And as my mother used to say, do something nice for yourself, but do something nice for others. Thank you.
This is Cindy Gilman, and you're listening to Discover Your Potential. So until next time, do something nice for yourself, but do something nice for someone else.
In every way, every day, I need less of myself, I need more him. 'Cause his is the only music that makes me dance.
Introducing Tower Gardens. With rising gas prices, food prices, fertilizer shortages, and uncertainty about what goes into your food, create an entirely different experience by bringing the supermarket into your home with easy-to-use Tower Gardens. The vertical aeroponic garden system has an efficient, compact design that is soil-free, weed-free, pesticide-free, practically maintenance-free, and requires minimal space. No green thumb necessary. Let your imagination run wild, growing celery, squash, watermelon, herbs, super greens, and much more, indoors or outdoors, all year round. Create your own food supply, save money and precious time with Tower Gardens. Learn more at peopleandpawswellness.com.